Hello, welcome to session 6 of PHS 318, which is titled Public Policy Formulation. In this session, we are going to look at three main topics. 1. Definition of public policy. 2. Public policy formulation process. And 3. The types of public policy. What is public policy? I must admit that it is quite tricky to have a universally acceptable definition for public policy. The reason is that different authors tend to look at the subject of public policy from different angles because they often write from their backgrounds and experiences. And given that not all authors share the same background and experiences, there is debate about what exactly the word public policy means. Despite this controversy, there are a few authoritative definitions that are worth looking at. For example, Thomas Dye defines public policy as what government chooses to do or not to do. According to this definition, both governmental action and or inaction amount to public policy. Let's take an illustration. Assuming that there is a problem of unemployment in Ghana and the government of Ghana decides to take certain decisive steps to solve this problem, according to Thomas Dye, that action taken by government amounts to public policy. But if for some reason government refuses to do something about this problem, again, it still amounts to public policy. Therefore, in the mind of Thomas Dye, it is not only governmental action that amounts to public policy, but also inaction on the part of government amounts to public policy. J.E. Anderson also defines public policy as a purposive course of action followed by a group of actors in dealing with a public problem or matter of concern. There are at least three things worth noting in this definition. One is that public policy is purposive in nature. A public policy has purpose. It is intended to solve a specific problem in society. The second thing to note is that a public policy is pursued by actors. These actors could be state actors, like the executive arm of government or the judiciary or the legislature, or they could be non-state actors like civil society organizations such as IEA, that's the Institute of Economic Affairs, and IDEC, that is the Institute for Democratic Governance. And public policies are always geared towards solving a specific problem in society, such as crime or unemployment or issues of low education access. From the foregoing definitions, the term public policy implies the following: that public policy is an authoritative definition. It is also a declaration of purpose and also a declaration of cause of action. Examples of public policy in Ghana include, but not limited to, the following. The National Health Insurance Scheme is an example of public policy. The Ghana School Feeding Program is also an example of public policy. And then the recent One District, One Factory project is also an example of public policy. Topic 2. What is policy formulation? Scholars often think of policy formulation as the processes and procedures that actors, both state and non-state, have to go through in order to design public policy. Therefore, policy formulation is about the processes and procedures through which public policies are designed or formulated. According to Thomas Dye, there are 6 steps involved in policy formulation. These include problem identification, agenda setting, policy formulation, policy legitimation, policy implementation, and policy evaluation. Let's take these one after another. By problem identification, we say that there are so many problems that confront society. So the first stage in the policy formulation process is to identify the problems that will be solved. As I mentioned to you earlier, there are so many problems, and so it is important for government to define for itself the problems that it intends to focus on. Once the problem has been identified, we move to the agenda setting stage. I mentioned to you earlier that human wants and needs are unlimited, but the resources to fulfilling these needs are limited. Therefore, within the public policy discourse, we have something we call agenda setting, which means the problems that will attract the attention of government. You can think about agenda setting as something like a scale of preference. So government, based on limited resources, will decide to focus on specific problems because it has the resources to be able to tackle them and not all the problems. Once the agenda is set, from this stage we move on to policy formulation, where specific policy proposals are designed to tackle the problem. Once the policy is formulated, it moves to policy legitimation, where the policy receives authoritative backing. Parliament is usually an important agency in this process. Once the policy passes from a bill into a law, it becomes ripe for policy implementation. The idea of policy implementation, it means that we have to translate the policy from theory into reality. And the major agency that is responsible for this is the bureaucracy. How can we tell that our policy has achieved its aim? That takes us to the sixth stage, that is policy evaluation. If the policy has achieved its aim, then it is time to take lessons so that we'll be able to apply the lessons in other policy areas. If the policy has failed, then we draw lessons so that we do not repeat the mistakes of policy implementation. All this is done at the policy evaluation stage. Topic 3 is the types of public policy. Anderson defines the following types of public policy. These are constituent policies, distributive policies, regulatory policies, self-regulatory policies, and redistributive policies. What are constituent policies? These are policies that are concerned with the structure and organization of government. For example, creation of new ministries. Now we have the Zongo and Inner City Development Ministry. This kind of structure is in line with constituent policies. Distributive policies allocate services or benefits to a particular segment of the population or groups because in most cases they are underserved or underprivileged. The features of distributive policies are that they are usually funded from public funds, and beneficiaries do not usually compete. Examples of distributive policies in Ghana include SADA, or the Proposed Zongo Development Fund. Regulatory policies, by the name, suggest imposition or restriction on the behavior and actions of individuals and groups. Regulatory policies tend to set forth what can be done or what cannot be done. There are two identifiable categories. These are business regulatory policies that regulate businesses and social regulatory policies that regulate the behavior of individuals. Redistributive policies are deliberate attempts by government to redistribute wealth, to redistribute the national cake so we can have a fair and just society. Whereas self-regulatory policies are policies that regulate the behavior of members belonging to a particular group like UTAC or the Ghana Medical Association or the Ghana Bar Association. In conclusion, we say that while it is difficult to obtain a universally acceptable definition of public policies, or let me take it again, public policy, some authoritative definitions are worthy of note, and we'll look at some of them. These definitions imply that public policies are a declaration of purpose, and they also express the purpose of government, and they declare a course of action, the fact that public policies are authoritative in nature. There are 6 main stages involved in policy formulation as identified by Thomas Dye. Although these stages may not follow the order as proposed in theory, they provide an important framework for analysis. This brings us to the end of session 6. Get ready as we continue with session 7.